next question is, earlier this month, Vitalik received a white paper about how Web3 DAOs and identity may look in Ethereum in the future. He introduces the concept of soulbound tokens and souls. This paper reminds me of Radix badges. Russell.
Yeah, so really, we're going to aggressively summarize this till you can think of it as one of the concepts was, NFTs on Ethereum, people are trading around. And so he proposed this idea of a non-tradable one where once it's assigned someplace and you could associate things like I have some characteristic about me, like I'm a member of this thing or something like that. Or this is part of my history. And because you can't transfer it, then you'd say, okay, I can now choose to treat this as a reliable record that, this person is who they say they are, or whatever things are being claimed by this NFT can never be transferred to someone else. And I don't know how many times people link this to us in Telegram and then people submitting emails and in Discord. And we just look at it and go, yeah, this crypto resource system, you get this for free. And not just non-transferable, but selectively transferable. You can have rules based on, if you have the correct authority badge, you can, transfer this token, or I can maybe have a period where it's like, well, under certain circumstances, it is transferable. Other ones, it's not. And all these things, we weren't necessarily specifically thinking of this exact use case. It's just that we wanted a nice, generic, powerful model. So it was a little odd to read that white paper and like, here's all this thinking and how it could be achieved and all that. And we're going, of course you can do that. That's just part of it. We have powerful rules around how resources can move, how they behave, rules on how they behave, and all those things are in the hands of the developer to control. And most importantly, all those rules can also be surfaced to the consumer. So it's not that you're just talking to this opaque smart contract and, I don't know if it really is non-transferable. I've just been told that if it applies to this data, it is, you can actually see. And in your wallet, you'll have a notification that this resource can never be transferred, or there are only specific rules under which it can be transferred, so that the user is made aware of, hey, this is not just we always use the term for like the most basic tokens. We think of it as just like a pile of rocks, right? You can easily subdivide it and you can push it around and all that kind of stuff. If the token is anything that is not a pile of rocks, as in more may be created, or there's restrictions on movement, we surface all that in a way that a wallet can expose to people. So we love the concept of you could have some non-fungible token, say, assigned to, it's held in an account that I control that can never move out of there, which shows my membership in a thing, or the fact that, it was a collectible that I attended this sporting event that issued it, and I can show forever I was there because I can't transfer it to anybody else. So it proves that I was the one who went to that concert or who saw that football game or whatever it is. And that's all easily achieved with just changing the rules on how that resource can move. So we love the concept. It's just one that you don't have to think hard about on Scripto. You can do it with literally one line of code if you wanted to make a thing never withdrawable.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the thinking about the utility of this is dead on. I mean, we're definite believers that when you start getting into Web3 notions of identity and so forth, like these things will be encoded as NFTs and they will carry history, and those NFTs will be elaborated and added to and so forth. And you'll be able to sort of accumulate a sense of identity in this tokenized form. It's just the cool thing is like that kind of direction is what went into the design of the asset model to begin with. It was just that like, we need to have that kind of flexibility. We don't want to build a system where every time someone has a new idea for like, here's a new thing that we can layer onto identity or something else. Now we need like another EIP standard. Now we have to re-implement that, and everyone has to, rewrite their smart contracts to make use of that new interface. Like, why can't you just define a resource that has the flexibility of being able to do that stuff independent from the resource itself? So like, we just have metadata on a resource. You can use that for whatever you want, and you can define who has the ability of changing that metadata, which means you can set up contracts that like, this particular entity is the only person that's able to change this piece of metadata that represents your educational history or your attendance of some event or whatever it is. We just do that by separating the business logic from the resource, which is one of the mantras that we always talk about. So totally agree with the direction of the whole thing, and we think we've actually got like a more flexible way of doing it just by nature.
I think that there's like, for me, there's like a mind expansion point here that like I always find a little bit mind blowing when you like realize what is done here versus how it's done in the old way. And it's this idea that like you have the ability to define an object, and then you have ability to assign specific rules to that object, which means that if those rules are granular, you can use any combination of those rules, right? So let's say that you have 20 different rules that you can apply to that object. Your actual possible combinations of things is like 20 factorial, right? So it's like an insane number of different ways in which you can create object sets with specific rules. Now, that would seem complicated from the point of view, that would be complicated. And apart from the fact that these rule sets against these objects go all the way up into the user interface. So now and they are inherent features of the platform, which means that there doesn't have to be any agreement for every specific combination of those rules. The rules are all instantly accessible by every single wallet, by every single implementation, instantaneously. The minute you create that combination, it will work in every wallet, it will work for every user, and every user will understand what it is, and every dApp will be able to interact with it. Now, take that concept and strip it away and go back to what Ethereum's doing, and they are saying for every single combination of rules that we want to create, we have to create a standard. For every single one, it has to be a separate standard. That standard has to go through an approval process. That approval process is the EIP process, which takes months, if not years, for every single standard. That standard, once it is agreed, then has to be integrated painstakingly into every single platform and into every single wallet and into every single exchange. And each point of those, you end up having problems and failures because you have to integrate this new set of interfaces that wasn't understood before, and that the security paradigm of it isn't understood either yet. So the amount of effort that is required just to introduce a new way of creating an object on top of Ethereum is absolutely monstrous. And it's not just because of the creation of the little program and the security problems in that. Let's forget about that. Let's just go with this idea of creating a program for a new type of object, and then all of the social coordination that is required after that to make that now a successful user product. Like, you start to see quite how big a hill Ethereum, or indeed any public ledger, Near, Polkadot, Avalanche, anyone who's using this model of the ledger not understanding objects or rules, and it's merely just being a little programs inside, that then you see how difficult it is to accelerate or expand the use cases or objects that are useful to people. Now, Vitalik is writing about this because he sees this particular set of object and rules that's a really good thing. We should make that, because it would be great if we can have something that is not tradable, right? That we have some ownership of the thing, that we went to a concert or an event, and only the people who went there can have that because it's tied to them, not something that's buyable, something that's more intrinsic than money, some experience or something that was important to them. Now, that's really important from the point of view of reputation and other secondary systems that are important in society. So 100%, like World of Warcraft built this into their system because they understood that players valued things beyond players just being able to buy their way to certain stats, right? So yes, 100% what Vitalik is suggesting with Soulbound tokens is a use case of the absolutely huge universe of potential use cases of objects and rules against those objects that specify how those objects can move on a ledger. But it is such a bad way of going about it fundamentally on Ethereum. And this is that's sort of the mind-blowing point for me about when you look at this Radix Engine Scripto model and you're like, oh my God, like just the speed at which something can emerge. So someone like Vitalik comes in and goes, well, this would be a good idea. And it goes from idea to in people's wallets and actually being real things that people can use. Like, that is what is missing in DeFi today. That's the thing, this institutional inertia that is so difficult to get over because of the social coordination problem that exists after someone's come up with a good idea that just goes away with Radix. So super exciting.
You don't need the influential figure. If you're just the independent developer who had a great new way of, whatever the rules are, the object movement or whatever it is, you don't need that influential figure to get anybody to pay attention to you. You could just release some component that uses this resource in that way, and everyone, again, as Piers says, can instantly interact with it. It goes, wow, that's really good, and it'll just take off on its own. You didn't have this to even get off the starting blocks to make it work at all. You have to have this proposal approved by whatever the governance body is and so forth.
Right.
You just release it, and it can be used. And if it's good, then you don't have to have it promoted at that point. It can grow on its own.
Right. Yeah, this is literally how we approach the use cases when people, it's like, how do you do this? How do you do that in Radix? It's like literally like, okay, cool. Can we write a component that achieves the result, the use case that you're trying to talk about in a way that didn't require us to re-implement the idea of token? It's something like, is there something that basically we can use the existing sort of the bits of configurability on the resource itself, and we can load whatever arbitrary, interesting, complex logic you want to build into in a way that's separated from the resource, but remains clear so that it's still just a resource. Like any other resource, the wallet still understands it. Anyone else can interact with it. It still works, where it makes sense. It still interacts with dexes. It still does all the things you would expect a resource to do, but you are still able to achieve the thing you wanted to do. And the cool thing is almost all the time we get a use case and go, oh yeah, cool. This fits into the model. You just write a component this way and you'd use a transient resource and do this, and boom, it's actually more elegant than doing this. And every once in a while we run a use case and we go, oh, that's interesting. That's actually a little bit difficult to do. And this is what's been influencing the Scripto roadmap, is then stepping and go, well, why is that difficult? It's not, and the solution to it isn't like, all right, now we need to now this is going to be a separate category of thing that we implement in a special way, and we're just going to duplicate the way you do in Ethereum. We go, this probably indicates that there's some gap in one of those, the 20 rules, sort of thing that Piers was talking about. Is there one of those that's missing? It's like, actually, when you think about it, real resources have this additional behavior that you would expect intuitively that actually we haven't included in there. And so there's been a couple of cases now since the creation of Scripto, since the beginning of the year, where we've gone yeah, there's actually a really interesting gap here. And it doesn't just solve this one use case. It opens up this whole class of use cases because it's based on expectations of how resources move rather than trying to solve point by point problems one after the other. It feels a lot better. The solutions that come out of that end up feeling a lot better because they feel much more flexible rather than being like, all right, now the whole thing is going to break once you want to add one more feature onto it.
Right. I sort of think of it as a little bit like a game of life. There's 3 simple rules, but with that you can build everything. It's really cool, and every single rule adds a huge amount more flexibility of things that you can create off the back of that as well. So yeah.